My name is Emily Bourke, and for 27 years, my mother told me I wasn't really part of this family. She said it at dinner tables and holiday gatherings, in passive-aggressive comments and quiet dismissals. She built an entire narrative around the idea that I was somehow less than, somehow other, somehow not quite a Bourke. 8 days ago, my grandfather died, and in his final act, he proved that I was the only Bourke who ever mattered to him. The reading of his will happened at my sister's wedding, in front of 200 guests, right before she said, "I do." And when the lawyer finished speaking, the woman in the $47,000 wedding dress wasn't crying tears of joy anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the day I was born, the day my mother decided I wasn't worth keeping. Before I continue, if you've ever been the forgotten child in your own family, type "me" in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone. And drop where you're watching from. I read every single one. I came into this world 7 weeks early. My mother, Vivian, had planned the perfect pregnancy, the perfect nursery, the perfect announcement. What she got instead was an emergency C-section and a baby who weighed barely 4 pounds. I spent 23 days in the NICU, hooked up to machines, fighting for every breath. The doctors called me a miracle. My mother called me a disappointment. I know this because my grandfather Harold told me years later. He was there in the hospital the day I finally came home. He watched Vivian hold me at arm's length, her face tight with something that wasn't quite love. "She looked at you like you were broken," he said once when I was old enough to understand, "like you'd already failed her before you even opened your eyes." 2 years later, my sister Colleen was born, full term, healthy, 8 pounds of perfection. Vivian finally had the daughter she wanted, and I became the rough draft that should have been thrown away. The phrase that defines my childhood wasn't cruel in an obvious way. My mother never hit me, never screamed obscenities, never did anything that would show up on a social worker's radar. Instead, she had 6 words that she deployed like tiny knives, cutting so precisely that I didn't even realize I was bleeding until years later. "You're not really a Bourke." She said it when I asked why Colleen got the bigger bedroom. She said it when I wondered why my birthday party was always smaller, cheaper, an afterthought. She said it when I questioned anything, wanted anything, needed anything that might take attention away from my sister. "You almost didn't make it, Emily. We never expected much from you, so don't expect much from us." My father, Glenn, was there for all of it. He heard every dismissal, witnessed every slight, watched his wife systematically erase his firstborn daughter from the family's emotional ledger. And what did he do? He perfected the art of looking at his shoes. "You know how your mother is," he'd say, as if that explained anything, as if that excused everything. He wasn't cruel like Vivian. He was something almost worse. He was present and passive, a witness who never testified. Growing up in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, we looked like the perfect family from the outside. Beautiful colonial house, manicured lawn, 2 daughters who wore matching dresses to church on Sundays. Nobody saw what happened behind closed doors. Nobody noticed that one daughter glowed while the other faded into the background. But here's what my mother didn't count on. While she was busy investing everything in the daughter she wanted, she forgot that the daughter she didn't want was watching, learning, keeping track. Let me show you what not really a Bourke looked like in practice. When I was 6 years old, I asked my mother why I didn't have a baby book like Colleen. My sister's book was thick, leather-bound, filled with photos and milestones and little handwritten notes about her first words, her first steps, her first everything. I found my baby book in a box in the attic. It was a thin spiral notebook with 3 pages filled in. My birth weight was wrong. When I was 9, I won a citywide art competition, first place in the elementary division. I ran home with a blue ribbon, convinced that this would be the thing that finally made my mother see me. Vivian glanced at the ribbon, said "that's nice," and went back to helping Colleen practice her dance routine for an upcoming recital. The ribbon disappeared from the kitchen counter by the next morning. I found it in the trash 2 days later. By the time I was 12, I had stopped expecting anything. That was the year I learned to become invisible on purpose, to want nothing, to need nothing, to give them no opportunity for disappointment because I had already accepted that disappointing them was inevitable. Colleen's 10th birthday was a princess party at the country club. 40 guests, a live pony for rides, a 4-tiered cake from the fancy bakery in Birmingham. Vivian spent weeks planning it, obsessing over every detail, making sure her perfect daughter had the perfect day. My 12th birthday that same year was a family dinner at home. Grocery store cake with my name misspelled, Emily, because Vivian was in a rush and didn't bother to check. 3 of my friends were supposed to come, but Vivian forgot to mail the invitations. She said she'd been too busy with Colleen's party planning. I blew out candles surrounded by people who didn't want to be there, making a wish that I already knew wouldn't come true. When Colleen graduated high school, it was an event. New dress, professional photos, a party with catered food. My father gave her a car, a Honda Civic, used, but still. The gift of freedom, he called it. When I graduated 2 years earlier, I wore the same dress I'd worn to junior prom because Vivian said we needed to save money. No party, no car, just a suggestion that maybe community college would be more realistic for someone like me, someone who wasn't really a Bourke. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy pretending I didn't exist, I was busy becoming someone who didn't need them. I got into the University of Michigan's architecture program on a scholarship because Vivian refused to touch the college fund for me. She said that money is for Colleen. She has real potential. So I worked 2 jobs, took out loans, and graduated in 4 years with a degree that was entirely mine. No help from the Bourkes, no acknowledgement from my mother. My father sent a card with a check for $50 and a note that said, "Proud of you, kiddo," as if $50 could make up for 22 years of silence. I moved to Detroit after graduation, found a job as a junior architect at a firm that specialized in commercial renovations, industrial spaces, warehouses, old factories being converted into something new. I was good at it. Turns out, when you've spent your whole life trying to rebuild yourself, you develop a talent for seeing potential in broken things. By 27, I was making $78,000 a year. I had my own apartment. I had a life that had nothing to do with Grosse Pointe or my mother's opinions or my shadow's sister. I was free, or so I thought. There was one person in my family who never made me feel like an outsider. My grandfather Harold was my father's father, a self-made man who'd built Bourke Commercial Services from a single laundromat in 1962 into a network of 12 industrial laundry facilities across Michigan. He was gruff, practical, and allergic to bullshit, which made him the only person in my family I actually respected. Grandpa Harold grew up poor in Flint, worked his way through trade school, and started his first business with $200 he borrowed from his uncle. He built everything himself, every machine, every contract, every relationship. By the time he retired at 75, Bourke Commercial Services was processing laundry for 47 hospitals, 23 hotels, and over 100 restaurants across the state. The man understood hard work in a way that Vivian, who had never held a job in her life, couldn't begin to comprehend. He never forgot my birthday. He called every year, same time, same greeting. "Happy birthday, kiddo. You surviving those people?" He came to my 8th grade graduation when my parents couldn't be bothered. He drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to watch me receive an academic excellence award in high school. The same night, Colleen had a routine dance competition that Vivian deemed more important. He came to my college graduation even though it was a 3-hour drive from his house in Traverse City. He sat in the audience alone because Vivian said it was too far to drive, even though it was 45 minutes closer to the lake house where they were vacationing that weekend. After the ceremony, he took me to dinner and told me something I've never forgotten. "You're more Bourke than any of them, Emily. You've got the fighter in you. Your grandmother had it too. Don't let them convince you otherwise." I didn't fully understand what he meant, not then. What I didn't know was that Grandpa Harold had been watching everything for 27 years, documenting everything, and planning something that would take nearly 3 decades to execute. But before I tell you what he did, let me show you what finally broke me. I was 24 years old when my appendix almost killed me. I'd been having stomach pain for days, ignoring it because I had deadlines and couldn't afford to be sick. By the time I got to the emergency room, the appendix was hours from rupturing. Emergency surgery, 2 days in the hospital. The kind of thing that makes you want your family, even when your family has spent your whole life making you feel unwanted. I called my parents from the pre-op room, hands shaking, terrified. My mother answered on the 4th ring. I told her I was in the hospital. I told her I was having surgery. I told her I was scared. And Vivian said, with that particular sigh she reserved for my inconveniences, "We can't come right now, Emily. Colleen has her engagement photo shoot tomorrow, and I need to help her prepare. You understand." I understood perfectly. I went into surgery alone. I woke up alone. I spent 2 days in that hospital room staring at the ceiling, wondering why I kept expecting different results from people who had shown me exactly who they were 1,000 times. The nurses kept asking if my family was coming. I made excuses. Traffic, work commitments. You know how it is. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth, that my family was 45 minutes away choosing flower arrangements over their daughter's emergency surgery. Then, Grandpa Harold walked through the door. He'd driven 3 hours from Traverse City the moment he heard. He was wearing his old fishing vests and boots that were still muddy from his property. He hadn't even changed. He'd just gotten in the car and driven. He brought flowers, trashy magazines, and the kind of pudding cups they only sell at gas stations. He sat with me for 2 days, telling stories about Grandma Ruth, about building the business, about all the times he'd wanted to tell my mother exactly what he thought of her parenting. He helped me walk to the bathroom when I was too weak to go alone. He argued with the nurses about getting me better painkillers. He slept in the chair next to my bed both nights, his neck at an angle that must have been agony for a man his age. On the second day, he said something that didn't make sense until much later. "They don't deserve you, kid, but I'm going to make sure you get what's yours." I thought he was just being sweet. I didn't realize he was making a promise. While I was in that hospital bed, Colleen posted photos from her engagement photo shoot. Professional lighting, designer dress, her fiancé Travis looking like he'd stepped out of a catalog. The caption read, "Best day ever with my amazing support system, family first," with the little heart emoji. I saw it from my hospital room. No mention of me, no visit. Family first, apparently, didn't include the daughter who almost died. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something quieter. Something that felt like acceptance. I finally stopped expecting them to be different. I finally stopped hoping they would wake up one day and see me. Looking back, I should have known something bigger was coming. The next 3 years passed in a blur of work, quiet holidays, and carefully maintained distance. I built my career. I bought my own apartment. I adopted a rescue dog named Walter, who didn't care if I was really a Bourke or not. I created a life that had nothing to do with Grosse Pointe. Then I met Dean Kowalski. It was on a renovation project. His firm was handling the engineering, mine was doing the architecture. We were converting an old auto parts factory into loft apartments, the kind of project I love because it's about seeing potential in something everyone else has written off. Dean was solid in a way I wasn't used to. He showed up when he said he would. He did what he promised. He didn't play games or keep score. The first time we had coffee, he asked about my family. I gave him the abbreviated version, the one I'd learned to tell that made it sound like normal dysfunction instead of systematic emotional abuse. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something that made me like him immediately. "That's not normal, Emily. You know that's not normal, right?" I knew. I'd always known. But hearing someone else say it, someone with no agenda, someone who had grown up with parents who actually liked each other and children they actually wanted, it felt like permission to stop pretending. We dated for 8 months before I told him the whole story. Every birthday ignored, every accomplishment dismissed, every time my mother had looked through me like I was made of glass. He didn't try to fix it or explain it away. He just held my hand and said, "I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm glad you got out." Dean was the first person outside of Harold who chose me, not because he had to, not because it looked good, just because he wanted to. 6 months before Colleen's wedding, Colleen called me for the first time in months, not to catch up, not to see how I was doing. She needed something. "I need you to be a bridesmaid. Mom says it'll look weird if you're not in the photos." Not, "I want you there." Not, "You're my sister." Just, "It'll look weird if you're not in the photos." The story of my entire life in one sentence. I should have said no. I should have laughed and hung up the phone and continued living my life without them. But there was still a part of me, after everything, that wanted to believe things could be different, that maybe the wedding would be a turning point, that maybe Colleen would finally see me as something other than an inconvenience. I was wrong. What followed was 6 months of financial and emotional hemorrhaging. The bridesmaid dress cost $1,200. Rose gold silk, custom fitted, had to be ordered from some designer in New York. I paid for it myself, because of course I did. When I mentioned that $1,200 was a lot for a dress I'd wear once, Colleen sighed and said, "This is why you're still single, Emily. You don't understand how to invest in important moments." The bridal shower was somehow my responsibility to organize because, as Colleen put it, my real friends are too busy with their own lives. So I spent 3 weekends and $2,800 creating what I thought was a beautiful afternoon tea party at the yacht club. Colleen's feedback? The sandwiches were too small, and it wasn't Pinterest enough. No thank you, no acknowledgement of the work, just criticism. The bachelorette party in Las Vegas cost $3,400, and I ended up covering extra because 2 other bridesmaids couldn't afford their share. 4 days of bottle service and spa treatments and watching my sister be celebrated while I played the role of invisible support staff. At one point, Colleen introduced me to someone as her assistant, not her sister, her assistant. I spent nearly $7,400 on a wedding for a sister who had never once asked how I was doing, and Colleen's only feedback was that I wasn't enthusiastic enough. But that wasn't the worst part. 1 week before the wedding, I was at my parents' house helping with last-minute preparations. I was in the kitchen making centerpieces when I overheard Vivian on the phone with someone, a lawyer, I realized, discussing estate matters. Once Dad passes, Vivian was saying, we'll sell the business and the building. That should cover Colleen's house down payment and the honeymoon in full. Plus enough left over for the kitchen renovation I've been wanting. There was a pause. Then Vivian laughed. Emily? No, she doesn't need anything from the estate. She's always been self-sufficient. Besides, she's not really, well, she's not really a Bourke in the way Colleen is. I stood there, holding silk flowers and hot glue, listening to my mother plan to give away my grandfather's life work to a sister who had never worked a day in her life, to fund a wedding I was paying to participate in, to buy a house for a woman who had never once thanked me for anything. That night, Grandpa Harold called. His voice was weaker than I remembered, more tired. I need to see you, Emily. Come to Traverse City tomorrow. Don't tell your mother. I drove 3 hours the next morning without telling anyone where I was going. When I arrived at Harold's house, the house he'd lived in for 40 years, I barely recognized him. He'd lost weight. His skin had a grayish tint. He moved like every step cost him something. He sat me down in his study, the room that smelled like pipe tobacco and old books, and he told me the truth. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. Weeks, maybe days. And then he showed me the folder. It was thick, worn at the edges, filled with documents that dated back 27 years. There were receipts showing how much money had been spent on Colleen versus me, screenshots of social media posts, including the engagement photo shoot from the day of my surgery, handwritten notes documenting conversations he'd overheard, comments Vivian had made, holidays where I'd been excluded. There were even audio recordings. Michigan is a one-party consent state, he said with a grim smile. But the most important document was at the bottom. A trust established in 1997, 3 days after I came home from the NICU. I set this up the day you left the hospital, Harold said. When I saw how your mother looked at you, like you were a burden instead of a gift, I knew I had to protect you. The trust contained everything. Bourke Commercial Services, all 12 facilities valued at $4.2 million. A commercial property on Gratiot Avenue in Detroit, worth $890,000. A savings account with $127,000. Everything Harold had built over 60 years of work. And the sole beneficiary was me, Emily Marie Bourke. I stared at the documents for what felt like hours. The numbers blurred. My hands were shaking. Grandpa, I can't. This is everything. This is your whole life. Harold shook his head slowly. My whole life was building something worth passing on. Your grandmother and I, we always said the business should go to someone who understood what it meant to work for what you have. Glenn never worked a day in his life that I didn't hand him. Colleen thinks money grows on trees. But you, Emily, you built yourself from nothing. You're the only one who deserves this. There was one more thing. Harold had left specific instructions about when and how the trust should be revealed. Not in a lawyer's office, not in a quiet reading with family members pretending to grieve. At Colleen's wedding, in front of everyone, before she said I do. I protested, told him it was too cruel, too public, that I didn't need revenge. Harold grabbed my hand with surprising strength for a dying man. This isn't revenge, kid. Revenge would be letting them live the rest of their lives never knowing what they lost. This is justice. I want them to know, in front of every person they've ever tried to impress, that they spent 27 years betting on the wrong daughter. I want the whole world to see who they really are. I sat with him for hours after that. We talked about Grandma Ruth, about the early days of the business, about all the times he'd wanted to intervene but knew it would only make things worse for me. He apologized for not doing more. I told him he'd done everything. 5 days later, Grandpa Harold died in his sleep. The funeral was scheduled for the week after the wedding because, as Vivian announced, we can't disrupt Colleen's big day. I attended a private memorial that Martin Calloway arranged. Just me, Martin, and a few of Harold's old business partners. I said goodbye to the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. And then I started counting down the days to the wedding. The week before the ceremony was the strangest week of my life. I moved through the world like a ghost, present but not really there. I smiled at the rehearsal dinner while Vivian gave a toast about the importance of family. I posed for photos with my sister while she complained about the flower arrangements. I listened to my mother talk about how proud she was of Colleen, how she'd always known her youngest daughter was destined for great things. I didn't say a word about Harold, about the trust, about what was coming. Every time someone asked if I was okay, I smiled and said I was just tired from all the wedding preparations. What happens next still gives me chills. They had no idea what was coming. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They thought I had finally learned my place. They had no idea it meant I was ready. Dean drove me to the venue the morning of the wedding, the Grosse Pointe Yacht Club, naturally. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a string quartet, 200 guests in designer outfits ready to witness the union of Colleen Bourke and Travis Whitmore. It was the kind of wedding that costs more than most people's houses. I put on my $1,200 bridesmaid dress, I fixed my hair, I looked in the mirror and reminded myself that in a few hours, everything would change. Dean squeezed my hand before I went in. Whatever happens today, I'm proud of you. I'll be waiting outside when it's over. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give them that. Colleen looked stunning in her $47,000 dress. Vivian sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Glenn sat beside her, silent as always. I stood in line with the other bridesmaids, watching my sister promise to love and cherish a man whose family had been carefully vetted for their country club membership and stock portfolio. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as Vivian had planned. Then the officiant spoke the words that would change everything. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The side door opened. Martin Calloway walked in wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The room went silent. Vivian's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like fear. I apologized for the interruption. Martin's voice carried across the yacht club with the calm authority of a man who had done this before. I'm Martin Calloway, executor of the estate of Harold Bourke. Mr. Bourke passed away 8 days ago and left explicit instructions that this document be read before any family member entered into major financial commitments, including marriage. Vivian stood up. This is completely inappropriate. We're in the middle of a ceremony. Martin didn't even glance at her. Mrs. Bourke, I suggest you sit down. What I'm about to read concerns you directly. The room was so quiet I could hear the flowers rustling in the air conditioning. Martin opened his briefcase and removed the thick document. The last will and testament of Harold Edward Bourke is as follows. He cleared his throat. To my son, Glenn Bourke, I leave $1 and my sincere disappointment in the man you became. To my daughter-in-law, Vivian Bourke, I leave $1 in the hope that you will one day understand the damage you've done. To my granddaughter, Colleen Bourke, I leave the jewelry that belonged to her grandmother Ruth. Nothing more. Colleen made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Travis looked at her, then at his parents, then back at her, as if doing calculations in his head. Travis continued, all remaining assets of my estate, including Bourke Commercial Services LLC, valued at approximately $4.2 million, the commercial property located at 4521 Gratiot Avenue, Detroit, Michigan, valued at approximately $890,000, and all funds held in trust since 1997, are hereby bequeathed to my granddaughter Emily Marie Bourke, the only member of this family who ever made me proud. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 people sat frozen in their seats. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. Someone's phone buzzed and it sounded like an explosion. Vivian's face had gone white. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the way her jaw had dropped, the way her eyes were darting around the room looking for someone, anyone, to tell her this wasn't real. Glenn stared at the floor like a man who had just watched his entire life unravel. Colleen was openly crying now, mascara streaming down her face, though I couldn't tell if she was crying for Harold or for the money she'd just lost. Travis, the groom, took a visible step away from Colleen. I watched him look at his parents, who were already whispering furiously to each other. The Whitmores had married their son into what they thought was old money, family business, generational wealth. They had just discovered it was smoke and mirrors. Martin pulled out one final document. Mr. Bourke also left a letter to be read aloud. He adjusted his glasses. For 27 years, I watched my son and his wife treat Emily like she was disposable. They told her she wasn't really a Bourke. They made her feel like a stranger in her own family. They were wrong. Emily is the only one who ever was. She has the fighter in her, the same fire that built this company from nothing. I'm sorry I won't be there to see her face when she learns the truth, but I hope she knows that every day of her life, someone was watching, someone was proud, someone knew exactly who she was. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice didn't waver. I didn't ask for this to happen today. Grandpa Harold did, because he knew that if I had a choice, I would have stayed quiet. I would have let you keep pretending I didn't exist. But he didn't want me to be quiet anymore. So here I am. I looked at my mother, at my father, at my sister in her $47,000 dress. You spent 27 years telling me I wasn't really a Bourke. Turns out, I was the only one Grandpa thought was worth anything. I reached behind my back and unzipped my bridesmaid dress. Underneath, I was wearing a simple navy shift dress I'd brought just for this moment. I stepped out of the $1,200 gown and handed it to Colleen. You can keep this. Consider it my wedding gift. I walked past my mother without looking at her, past my father, who was crying now, though whether from grief or shock I couldn't tell, past my sister in her $47,000 dress, her perfect day in ruins, past 200 guests who would spend the next year telling this story at dinner parties. Then I walked out the side door and never looked back. Dean was waiting in the parking lot, just like he promised. He was leaning against his truck, still wearing the suit he'd put on that morning, the one he'd bought just for this occasion. He didn't know what was going to happen today. I hadn't told him, but he knew me well enough to know that something was coming, and he wanted to be there when it did. He didn't ask questions. He just held me while I shook, processing everything that had just happened. The relief, the grief, the strange emptiness of finally being free from people who never wanted me anyway. After a while, he pulled back and looked at me. You okay? I thought about it. Really thought about it. And for the first time in 27 years, I realized I was. Yeah, I said. I think I actually am. He kissed my forehead and opened the passenger door for me. Then let's go home. The wedding continued, I heard later. Colleen and Travis said their vows in front of 200 guests who had just watched the family fortune disappear. The reception was apparently very quiet. That was a year ago. I took over Bourke Commercial Services 3 months after the wedding, kept all the employees, most of whom had known Harold for decades, and were thrilled to see the business stay in the family. I hired a management team, expanded to 3 new locations, and turned the company that my mother planned to sell into something even Harold would have been proud of. Last quarter, we processed more volume than any year in company history. I sold my apartment in Detroit and moved to Traverse City. Bought Harold's house, the one filled with pipe tobacco smell and old books. I kept his study exactly the way he left it, down to the half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk. Sometimes I sit in his chair and tell him about the business, about Dean, about the life I'm building. I like to think he can hear me. Dean and I got married in the backyard 6 months ago. 30 guests, homemade food, and not a single person who made me feel like I didn't belong. We hung fairy lights in the trees and danced on the grass Harold used to mow himself. It wasn't a $47,000 wedding. It was better. Dean's parents walked me down the aisle. His mother cried. His father said he was proud to welcome me to the family. It was the first time anyone had ever said those words to me. I cried so hard I couldn't get through my vows. Dean just laughed and held my hands and told me to take my time. Before we continue to the end, I want to thank you for being here. If you're enjoying this story, please hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and it means the world to me. Now, let me tell you what happened to the Bourkes. As for the Bourkes, their story didn't end well. My parents had to sell the house in Grosse Pointe. Turns out they'd been living beyond their means for years, counting on Harold's inheritance to bail them out. They'd refinanced twice, run up credit card debt, taken loans against equity that wasn't theirs. The house sold for less than they owed. They moved into a two-bedroom apartment in a suburb I'd never heard of. Vivian had to get a job for the first time in 30 years. I heard she works at a department store now, selling perfume to women who used to be her friends. Glenn bags groceries at a Kroger 3 nights a week. Colleen and Travis lasted 8 months. He filed for divorce when he realized the family money he'd been counting on wasn't coming. The prenup his parents insisted on protected him completely. Colleen walked away with her grandmother's jewelry and not much else. Last I heard, she's working as a receptionist at a dental office and living in a studio apartment. She still posts on Instagram like nothing happened. Pictures of brunch and inspirational quotes about living your best life. The comments are always off. My father sent me a letter 3 months after the wedding. 5 pages, handwritten, on paper that looked like it came from a hotel notepad. He apologized for everything, said he knew Vivian was wrong but never had the courage to stand up to her, said he'd spent his whole life being afraid of conflict, said he hoped I could forgive him someday. He wrote about the day I was born, how scared he was in the NICU watching his tiny daughter fight for her life, how he'd wanted to protect me but didn't know how somewhere along the way he'd let Vivian's voice become louder than his own conscience. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer and didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some damage can't be undone with words. My father had 27 years to choose me. He chose silence instead. He chose comfort. He chose the path of least resistance while his daughter was being erased from her own family. I don't hate him for it. I just don't have room for him in my life anymore. Dean asked me once if I felt guilty, about the wedding, about the way it all went down, about watching my family implode in real time. I thought about it for a long time before I answered. The guilt I felt wasn't for what happened to them. It was for how long I waited to stop letting it happen to me. For all the years I kept trying to earn love from people who had decided before I could walk that I wasn't worth loving. Grandpa Harold gave me more than money. He gave me permission to stop pretending. To stop hoping they would change, to stop believing that if I was just good enough, just quiet enough, just invisible enough, they would finally see me. They were never going to see me. That wasn't my failure, it was theirs. I think about Vivian sometimes, about what made her the way she was. I'll probably never know. Maybe she was damaged by her own parents, her own childhood wounds that never healed. Maybe she just didn't have the capacity to love a child who didn't fit her vision of perfection. Maybe some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed. It doesn't matter anymore. Understanding why someone hurt you doesn't undo the hurt. It just helps you stop waiting for an apology that's never coming. I keep one photo on my desk now. It's from Harold's 80th birthday, 5 years ago. Just the two of us, standing in front of the original laundromat where he started the business. He's got his arm around me and we're both laughing at something I don't remember anymore. On the back, in his handwriting, it says, "The only Bourke who matters." For 27 years, they told me I wasn't really a Bourke. My grandfather spent those same 27 years proving them wrong. I didn't lose my family that day at the wedding. I finally found out who my family really was. And it turns out it was just one person all along. The one person who chose me when no one else would. Thank you so much for watching. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone choose you when your own family wouldn't? I read every single one. See you in the next video.